For 3 years, Adrian Calloway, one of the most feared mafia bosses in New York, believed his wife was nothing more than a quiet, ordinary woman who should feel grateful just to breathe in his world. On a stormy Manhattan night, he placed divorce papers in front of her, expecting tears, begging, maybe rage. Instead, Vivian Whitmore signed every page without a single tremor. Then she looked at the priceless painting above his fireplace and whispered 7 words that would begin the total destruction of his empire. If you want to see how one woman dismantled a crime dynasty without ever raising her voice, stay with this story until the very end. Hit that like button and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far this story reaches. Now, let's begin. The storm had been building over Manhattan for hours before it finally broke. Not the kind of soft summer rain that cooled the pavement and made the city smell almost clean. This was something heavier, something meaner. Thunder cracked low across the skyline like a fist hitting a table, and the windows of the Calloway penthouse on the 42nd floor of the Sovereign trembled with every gust that slammed against them. Adrian Calloway stood in the center of his private study with his back to the door. He wore a dark navy suit, no tie, the collar undone by 2 buttons. His hands were in his pockets. His jaw was set in that particular way it always was right before he did something irreversible. He was staring out at the city like he owned it, which, in many ways, he did. He was 37 years old and had been running the Calloway organization since his father's death 6 years ago. Not inherited gently, not passed down with ceremony. His father, William Calloway, had dropped dead of a heart attack on the floor of a warehouse in Red Hook during a meeting with union bosses, and Adrian had stepped over the body. Literally stepped over it, picked up his father's phone, and finished the negotiation before the paramedics even arrived. That was the man he was. That was the kind of cold that ran in his blood. He didn't grieve. He adjusted. He reorganized. He consolidated. And within 18 months, he had expanded the Calloway empire into territories his father never had the nerve to touch. Real estate, international freight, private equity fronts that laundered cash through 16 shell companies spread across 4 states, a network of restaurants, nightclubs, and construction firms that looked perfectly legitimate from the outside, but fed a river of untraceable money back into the family's core operations. Adrian didn't just run a crime family, he ran a machine. And tonight, he was about to cut loose the one piece of that machine he considered dead weight. He heard the door open behind him, didn't turn around. "She's on her way up," said Marcus Cole, his chief enforcer and oldest friend. Marcus was the kind of man who could break a person's arm while maintaining eye contact and a conversational tone. He'd been with Adrian since they were teenagers running errands for William, back when the Calloway name still meant something rough and unpolished. Now Marcus wore tailored suits and carried a legal firearm permit, but the violence in him hadn't gone anywhere. It had just learned to dress better. Adrian nodded once. "My mother?" "Already here. East sitting room. Madison, too." "Good." Marcus hesitated in the doorway. That alone was unusual. Marcus Cole didn't hesitate. He didn't second guess. He didn't linger. But something about tonight seemed to bother him, and it showed in the way he shifted his weight from one foot to the other like a man standing on ground he didn't trust. "You sure about this?" Marcus asked. His voice was low, careful, not questioning Adrian's authority, just questioning his timing. Adrian finally turned. His face was a mask. Handsome in that sharp, almost cruel way. Dark eyes, hard cheekbones, a mouth that rarely smiled, and when it did, it never reached his eyes. "She's been dead weight for 3 years, Marcus. A nobody. A placeholder. I married her because my father thought it would soften the family's image. A quiet wife, a domestic front. PR for the organization." He paused, looked at the leather folder on his desk. "That purpose is done." Marcus said nothing, but he didn't leave either. "What?" Adrian's voice sharpened. "Nothing." Marcus adjusted his cufflink. "Just, she never caused any problems. Not once." "That's exactly the problem. She never did anything at all." Marcus held his gaze for a beat too long, then nodded and disappeared into the hallway. His footsteps faded against the marble. Adrian picked up the leather folder. Inside were the divorce papers. 23 pages. Every clause designed to strip Vivian Whitmore of any claim to the Calloway fortune, any right to property, any connection to the family name. His legal team had spent 2 weeks drafting it, airtight, aggressive, the kind of document that wasn't just a legal filing. It was a message. You were nothing before me. You'll be nothing after. He carried the folders into the main living area, a sprawling room with floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the storm outside like a painting. The furniture was dark leather and polished wood. A massive stone fireplace dominated the far wall, and above it hung a painting, an original oil work from the early 20th century, something his father had acquired decades ago through channels no one discussed. It was worth more than most apartments in the city. The Callaways kept it not because they loved art, but because they loved owning things other people couldn't. Evelyn Callaway was already seated in the east corner, her legs crossed, a crystal glass of white wine in her hand. She was 63 years old and looked 50. Her silver hair was cut sharp at the jawline, her posture was military straight, and her eyes held the kind of intelligence that most people mistook for warmth until they got close enough to realize it was calculation. She had been the real power behind William Callaway for decades. Not officially, never publicly. But everyone inside the organization knew you didn't cross Evelyn. Not if you wanted to keep breathing. Beside her sat Madison Callaway, Adrian's younger sister. 29, blonde, beautiful in the way that expensive things are beautiful, polished, maintained, and entirely without warmth. Madison ran the family's legitimate nonprofit foundations, which existed primarily as tax shelters and reputation laundering. She was smart enough to manage the paperwork and cruel enough to enjoy the power it gave her. She had despised Vivian from the moment Adrian brought her home, not for any specific reason, just on principle. Vivian was an outsider. Vivian was quiet. Vivian didn't fight back. And in Madison's world, people who didn't fight back deserved whatever happened to them. "Is it done?" Evelyn asked without looking up from her wine. "She's on her way up now," Adrian said. Madison smiled. It was the kind of smile that preceded suffering. "I want to see her face. I've been waiting for this for 3 years." Evelyn set her glass down with a soft click. "Don't gloat, Madison. It's beneath us. We're simply correcting a mistake your father made." "A mistake he made and we endured," Madison replied. Adrian placed the leather folder on the glass coffee table and sat down across from it. He checked his watch. 8:47 p.m. The rain hammered the windows in sheets. Lightning turned the room white for a half second. Then the dark rushed back in. The elevator chimed. Footsteps. Soft, unhurried. Vivian Whitmore entered the room the way she always entered rooms. Without announcement, without noise, without taking up more space than she needed to. She was 34 years old, and her appearance was the kind that people forgot easily. Not because she was plain, but because she had spent years training the world to overlook her. Medium height. Dark hair pulled back simply. A face that was striking in its stillness, like a lake that looked calm on the surface, but no one knew how deep the water went. She wore a dark coat over a simple dress. No jewelry, no makeup beyond the basics. She carried a small black handbag and nothing else. Adrian studied her the way he studied everyone, looking for weakness, for leverage, for the crack that would tell him how to control the conversation. But Vivian's face gave him nothing. It never had. That was one of the things about her that had always irritated him more than he'd ever admitted. She was unreadable. In his world, unreadable was either a sign of profound stupidity or profound danger. He had always assumed it was the former. "Sit down, Vivian," he said. Not unkindly, just flat. The way you'd speak to someone who was already irrelevant. She sat, placed her handbag on the floor beside her feet, folded her hands in her lap. Her eyes moved across the room, registering Evelyn, Madison, the folder on the table, the storm outside, and then settled back on Adrian with a calm that felt almost clinical. "You know why you're here," Adrian said. "I can guess." He pushed the folder toward her. "Divorce papers. My legal team drafted them. Everything is outlined clearly. You'll receive a settlement, generous considering the circumstances, and in return you relinquish all claims to Callaway assets, properties, business interests, and the family name." He paused, waited for the reaction, the tears, the trembling lip, the desperate plea. Something, anything. Vivian opened the folder. She read the first page, turned to the second, then the third. Her expression didn't change. Not a flicker. Not a tightening around the eyes. Not a shift in her breathing. She read the way a person reads a restaurant menu in a language they already know, efficiently, without emotion, without surprise. Madison leaned forward in her chair, practically vibrating with anticipation. Evelyn watched with the cool detachment of a surgeon observing a routine procedure. Vivian reached the last page. She looked at the signature line, then she looked up at Adrian. "Do you have a pen?" The room went still. Adrian blinked. It was the only crack in his composure, and it lasted less than a second, but it was there. He had prepared himself for resistance, for negotiation, for tears that he could dismiss, for anger that he could crush, for begging that he could ignore. He had not prepared for compliance. He reached into his jacket and produced a pen. A Mont Blanc. Heavy, black. He placed it on the table beside the folder. Vivian picked it up, and without another word she signed every page. Cleanly, steadily, page after page after page. 23 signatures, each one precise, each one calm. The pen moved across the paper with the quiet authority of someone who had made this decision long before anyone in the room had ever considered it. When she finished, she closed the folder, placed the pen on top of it, and pushed it back across the table toward Adrian. Madison opened her mouth to say something, some barb, some final cruelty she had been rehearsing in her head all evening. But before she could speak, Vivian stood. She didn't rush. She didn't stumble. She picked up her handbag, adjusted the strap on her shoulder, and turned toward the door with the same unhurried calm she had carried into the room. Then she stopped. Her eyes drifted to the painting above the fireplace, the oil masterpiece, the Callaway trophy. She studied it for a long moment, longer than she had studied the divorce papers, and a faint expression crossed her face. Not sadness, not anger. Something else entirely. Something that looked almost like recognition. "Beautiful collection," she said quietly. Her voice was soft but clear, cutting through the silence like a blade through silk. "I wonder how much longer your family will be able to keep it." The words hung in the air. Madison's smile died. Evelyn's hand froze around her wine glass. Adrian felt something tighten in his chest, something he hadn't felt in years. Not fear exactly, something worse. Uncertainty. By the time he opened his mouth to respond, Vivian was already gone. The elevator doors closed behind her with a soft chime, and the penthouse fell into a silence so thick it seemed to press against the walls. Madison stood up. "What the hell was that supposed to mean?" Evelyn said nothing. She was staring at the painting. Her jaw was tight. "Mother?" Madison's voice climbed. "What did she mean?" "Sit down, Madison." But she just, "I said sit down." The sharpness in Evelyn's voice cut through the room like a whip. Madison sat. But her eyes were wide now, and the smugness that had been living on her face all evening was gone, replaced by something raw, something closer to confusion. Adrian hadn't moved. He was still standing where Vivian had left him, the signed divorce papers on the table in front of him, the pen lying across the top like a punctuation mark at the end of a sentence he didn't fully understand. He replayed her words in his mind. "Beautiful collection. I wonder how much longer your family will be able to keep it." There was no threat in them, no hostility, just observation, like she was commenting on the weather. And that, somehow, made them worse. He turned to Marcus, who was standing in the hallway entrance, arms folded, face neutral. "Find out where she goes," Adrian said. "Tonight. I want to know where she's sleeping, who she talks to, and what she does the minute she walks out of this building." Marcus nodded and was gone. Evelyn finally set down her wine. Her hand was trembling, not from weakness, from something else. "Adrian," she said carefully, "what do we actually know about that woman?" "What do you mean? She's nobody. She was a financial consultant at a mid-level firm when Dad arranged the marriage. No family money, no connections, no—" "I'm not asking what we assumed. I'm asking what we know, what we verified." The question landed like a stone in still water. Adrian looked at his mother, really looked at her. And for the first time in as long as he could remember, he saw something behind Evelyn Callaway's iron composure that he had never seen before. Doubt. The next morning broke gray and heavy over Manhattan. The storm had passed, but it left the city bruised, puddles reflecting dirty sky, steam curling from subway grates, the smell of wet concrete and exhaust hanging in the air like something the night had forgotten to take with it. Adrian was awake before dawn. He hadn't slept. Not because of guilt. Adrian Calloway was not a man who lost sleep over guilt, but because something was gnawing at him. Something small and sharp, like a splinter lodged deep under the skin where his fingers couldn't reach it. He sat in his study with a cup of black coffee going cold on the desk beside him. His laptop was open, but the screen had gone dark. He'd been staring at Vivian's personnel file, the one his legal team had compiled when the marriage was first arranged. 22 pages of background. Education, bachelor's in art history from a small liberal arts college in Vermont. Employment, financial planning assistant at a midtown firm called Grayson and Associates. No criminal record, no significant assets. No family connections. No indication of anything remarkable at all. That was the file. That was all they had. 3 years. He had been married to her for 3 years, and this thin, unremarkable file was all anyone had ever bothered to assemble, because nobody thought she was worth investigating further, because she was quiet, because she was polite, because she never pushed back, never asked questions, never inserted herself into the business. She was wallpaper, background noise, a prop. Beautiful collection. I wonder how much longer your family will be able to keep it. He closed the laptop, rubbed his eyes. His phone buzzed. Marcus. Talk to me, Adrian said. Marcus's voice was flat, controlled, but there was an edge to it that Adrian recognized. The same edge Marcus got when something didn't add up. She went to a hotel, the Langham, 5th Avenue. That's a $1,200 a night hotel. I know. She doesn't have that kind of money. Silence on the other end. Marcus? She checked in under her own name, no hesitation. The front desk treated her like a returning guest. The concierge greeted her personally. By name. Adrian said nothing. He stood and walked to the window. The city spread out below him. Gray, vast, indifferent. There's something else, Marcus continued. I made some calls this morning. Quiet calls. To people I trust. I asked about Vivian Whitmore. And most of them had nothing. Same as us. Nobody. No connections. Invisible. Most of them? One guy, Danny Serrano, works intelligence for a private security firm in Midtown. He went quiet when I said her name. Then he told me to drop it. Drop it? His exact words were, "That's not a name you want to be asking about, Marcus. Not in the circles she runs in." Then he hung up. The silence that followed was the loudest thing Adrian had heard in months. He gripped the phone tighter. Find out what circles he's talking about. I don't care how deep you have to dig. I want answers. He hung up, turned back to the empty room. The coffee was cold. The sky was flat. And for the first time in years, Adrian Calloway had the uncomfortable sensation that he was standing on a stage he didn't control. 2 floors below Adrian's study, in the sprawling East Wing sitting room that Evelyn Calloway had claimed as her personal domain for decades, the matriarch of the family was conducting her own quiet investigation. Evelyn had not become the power behind the Calloway throne by being sentimental or slow. She had married William Calloway at 22, had recognized his weaknesses before the honeymoon was over, and had spent the next 4 decades quietly steering the organization from behind a carefully constructed facade of social grace and maternal devotion. She was the one who had identified which police captains could be bought. She was the one who had arranged the early real estate deals that transformed the Calloways from street-level thugs into a legitimate-looking financial empire. And she was the one who, 6 years ago, had called the emergency meeting within hours of William's death and made sure Adrian, not any of the dozen ambitious lieutenants circling the family like wolves, assumed control without a single day of power vacuum. Evelyn understood power the way a surgeon understands the human body. She knew where to cut, where to apply pressure, and where the fatal arteries ran. And right now, something was bothering her. She sat at her writing desk with a leather-bound address book open in front of her, an old habit she refused to abandon despite the digital age. She had already made 3 calls this morning. The first was to her personal attorney. The second was to a private wealth manager who handled accounts for several old money families on the Upper East Side. The third was to a woman named Constance Hargrove, who ran the donor development office at the Metropolitan Cultural Alliance. The first 2 calls had given her nothing. Standard answers. No flags. The third call had given her a chill that still hadn't left her body. She had asked Constance, casually, over the course of a conversation about an upcoming charity gala, whether she had ever encountered a woman named Vivian Whitmore. Constance had paused. A long pause. The kind of pause that wasn't about remembering, it was about deciding. Then Constance had said, very carefully, "Evelyn, darling, why are you asking me about Vivian Whitmore?" "She was married to my son. They've just divorced. I'm simply curious about her background." Another pause, longer this time. "Evelyn, I can't discuss that. But I will tell you this. If your family just divorced Vivian Whitmore, you should probably speak to your financial people. Soon." The call ended. Evelyn had sat motionless for 5 full minutes afterward, the phone still in her hand, her mind running through scenarios like a chess player calculating 12 moves ahead. Vivian Whitmore. The woman who had sat at the Callaway dinner table for 3 years and barely spoken above a murmur. The woman Madison had openly mocked. The woman Adrian had treated like furniture. The woman Evelyn herself had dismissed as William's final miscalculation, a marriage arrangement made by a dying man who had gone soft at the end. What if they had all been wrong? Evelyn closed her address book, picked up her phone, dialed her son. "Adrian, we need to talk. Not on the phone. Come down here." She hung up without waiting for a response. The first sign that something was wrong with the Callaway finances appeared 2 days after the divorce. It started small. An automated alert from the organization's primary offshore account in the Cayman Islands. A discrepancy of $340,000 between the expected balance and the actual balance. Adrian's CFO, a meticulous man named Howard Voss, flagged it during his morning review and assumed it was a processing delay. International transfers sometimes hung in limbo for 48 hours. Standard. He moved on. The next day, a second alert. This time from a different account. A shell company called Meridian Holdings, registered in Delaware, which the Callaways used to funnel revenue from their construction contracts. The account was short by $1.2 million. Not a processing delay this time. The money had been moved, redirected. The transaction record showed a series of transfers that bounced through 3 intermediary banks before landing in an account that Howard Voss had never seen before. He called Adrian immediately. "It's probably a glitch," Adrian said. "Run a full audit. I want it on my desk by Friday." It was not a glitch. By the end of the week, Howard Voss had identified 7 separate accounts across the Callaway financial network that showed unauthorized movement of funds. Not random, not chaotic, surgical. Whoever was doing this knew exactly where the money was, exactly how it was structured, and exactly which accounts were the most vulnerable. Total exposure, $14.7 million. Moved, redirected, or frozen in ways that Howard's team couldn't immediately reverse. Adrian sat in his office staring at the numbers. $14.7 million. Not enough to cripple the empire. Not even close. But enough to send a message. Enough to prove that someone who understood the Callaway financial architecture from the inside, had reached into the organization and pulled a thread. "Who has access to these accounts?" Adrian asked, his voice low and dangerous. Howard swallowed. "Internally? 6 people, you, me, your mother, your legal counsel, and 2 senior account managers. And externally? No one should have external access. These accounts are layered behind—" "I didn't ask who should have access, Howard. I asked who does." Howard's face went pale. I'll need to run a deeper forensic trace. That will take time." "You have 72 hours. Howard left the office like a man walking to his own execution. Adrian picked up his phone, called Marcus. "Tell me you have something." Marcus's voice was different now. The edge was gone, replaced by something heavier. "I've been digging for 3 days. Every lead I follow turns into a wall. Vivian Whitmore's background, the one we've had on file for years. It's all real. Education, work history, address history, all checks out." "Then what's the problem?" "The problem is what's not in the file. The gaps. Between the time she graduated from that school in Vermont and the time she surfaced at Grayson and Associates, there's a 2-year gap. No employment records, no tax filings, no address, nothing. She just vanishes for 2 years and then reappears. People take time off, travel, whatever. Sure. Except I talked to 3 more people today, discreetly. 2 of them had never heard of her. The third? a woman who works in institutional art finance. She didn't just know Vivian's name, she knew her reputation. Said Vivian Whitmore is connected to a network of private collectors and investment groups that operate way above our pay grade. International, old money, museum level. Adrian sat down slowly. That's not possible. She was a financial planner at a midtown firm. She barely had a savings account when we... Adrian. Marcus's voice was firm, controlled, but underneath it, something else. Something that sounded impossibly like caution. What if she had a savings account? What if she had a lot more than a savings account? What if the file we have on her is exactly what she wanted us to have? The question hit Adrian like a bucket of cold water. Not because it was absurd, because it wasn't. He hung up, sat in the silence of his office, stared at the wall. Beautiful collection. I wonder how much longer your family will be able to keep it. Not a threat, a forecast. The first external blow came on a Tuesday. Adrian was in a meeting with 3 of the Callaway organization's most important private investors, men who had quietly funneled money into the family's real estate ventures for over a decade in exchange for guaranteed returns and absolute discretion. These were not small players. Thomas Archer, a retired hedge fund manager who controlled a personal fortune north of $400 million. Jeffrey Bain, who owned half the commercial property on the Upper West Side. And Dominic LaSalle, a former Wall Street trader turned private equity kingpin whose connections reached into every major bank on the eastern seaboard. These men didn't scare easily. They didn't flinch at market corrections or regulatory investigations or even the occasional federal subpoena. They had survived every storm the financial world had thrown at them because they were careful, ruthless, and patient. So when all 3 of them arrived at the Callaway offices on the same Tuesday morning with the same grim expression, Adrian knew something was seriously wrong. We need to talk about our exposure, Thomas Archer said. No pleasantries, no small talk, just the words laid flat on the conference table like a loaded gun. What exposure? Adrian asked. Several of our investment partners have received inquiries, informal ones, from institutional auditors looking into the financial structures behind some of your real estate holdings. Adrian kept his face neutral. Inquiries are routine. We've weathered them before. These aren't routine. Jeffrey Bain's voice was tight. Someone is feeding them information, specific information, account structures, transfer patterns, the kind of detail that doesn't show up in public filings. Dominic LaSalle leaned forward. Adrian, I'm going to be direct. I've moved money through your operations for 12 years, and in all that time, I've never felt exposed. Right now, I feel exposed, and when I feel exposed, I move my money to safer ground. The words landed like hammer blows. Give me 2 weeks, Adrian said. His voice was steady, but his hands, hidden beneath the table, were clenched into fists. I'll identify the source and shut it down. The 3 men exchanged looks. The kind of look that men exchange when they've already made a decision and are simply going through the motions of the conversation. 1 week, Thomas Archer said. After that, we reassess. They left without shaking hands. Adrian sat alone in the conference room for a long time after they were gone. The city hummed outside the windows. Traffic, sirens, the dull roar of 10 million lives grinding forward. He pressed his palms flat against the table and breathed. In through the nose, out through the mouth, slow, controlled. The way his father had taught him to breathe when the world was coming apart, and you couldn't afford to let anyone see the cracks. Someone was attacking the Callaway empire. Not with guns, not with violence, not with the crude, blunt instruments that Adrian's world typically employed. This was different. This was surgical, financial, precise. Whoever was behind it understood the Callaway infrastructure better than most of the people who worked inside it. And in the deepest, most guarded corner of his mind, the place where Adrian Callaway kept the truths he wasn't yet ready to face, a name was already forming. He picked up his phone. His thumb hovered over Marcus's number, but before he could dial, the phone rang. Incoming call. His sister. Adrian! Madison's voice was high, thin, edged with something between anger and panic. Have you seen the news? What news? Channel 4 business segment. They're running a story about the South Miami Harbor redevelopment project, saying there are questions about the financing, about our financing. Someone leaked documents. Adrian closed his eyes. Adrian, are you there? They're saying, I'm here. They mentioned the Callaway name on television in connection with irregular financial transfers. This is... I know what it is. He hung up, set the phone on the table, and for the first time in his adult life, Adrian Callaway sat perfectly still and felt the ground shifting beneath him. Somewhere in this city, or beyond it, someone was pulling the strings. Someone who knew exactly where the Callaway empire was weakest. Someone who had been watching, studying, cataloging every vulnerability for years from a position so close that no one had ever thought to look. And that someone had signed divorce papers in his penthouse 6 days ago with a hand that didn't shake. That evening, Marcus called with the last piece of information Adrian would receive before everything changed. "I found the 2-year gap," Marcus said. His voice was quiet. The kind of quiet that comes from a man who has just seen something he wishes he could unsee. The years she was off the grid before she surfaced at Grayson and Associates. Where was she? Chicago, working under a different professional identity. Not a fake name, same legal name, just a completely separate professional track. She wasn't doing financial planning, Adrian. Then what was she doing? Marcus paused. A long pause. The kind that changes conversations. She was working in institutional art finance, advisory level, connected to a private investment group called the Whitmore Legacy Foundation. Whitmore, that's her maiden name. It's not just her name, it's her family's name, her family's foundation. Adrian, the Whitmore Legacy Foundation manages a private art collection valued at somewhere between $600 million and $1 billion. It's one of the largest private collections in North America. And Vivian Whitmore isn't just connected to it. The storm had returned to Manhattan. Rain struck the windows like gravel. She runs it. The words fell into the silence and stayed there. Adrian stood at the window, the phone pressed to his ear, the city dissolving into streaks of water and light below him. His reflection stared back at him from the dark glass. A man who was realizing with nauseating clarity that the person he had dismissed, ignored, and discarded was not the person he thought she was. Not even close. "There's more," Marcus said. "I don't have the full picture yet, but what I'm hearing from people who actually move in these circles is that Vivian Whitmore is one of the most connected figures in international art finance. She doesn't just collect, she brokers. She advises. She sits on boards. She has relationships with museum directors, sovereign wealth funds, and old money families across 3 continents." Adrian's hand was shaking, not from fear, from something worse, from the slow, sickening realization that he had been fooled. Not by deception, not by lies, by his own arrogance, by his absolute, unshakable conviction that his world was the only world that mattered, and that anyone who didn't fight for a place in it must be worthless. "One more thing," Marcus said. "The Harrington International Auction is in 3 weeks. It's the biggest art auction event of the year. Every major collector, investor, and power player in the country will be there." "I know what Harrington is." "Then you should know this. Vivian Whitmore's name is on the benefactor list. Not as an attendee, not as a guest, as one of the primary financial backers of the entire event." Lightning split the sky outside the window. For one frozen moment, the whole city turned white. And in that flash, Adrian Callaway saw something he had never seen before. The shape of his own irrelevance, standing right in front of him, waiting patiently for him to notice. He lowered the phone, stared at the darkness beyond the glass. And somewhere deep inside the architecture of his pride, a crack appeared. Small, quiet, but growing. The forensic audit landed on Adrian's desk at 6:14 on a Thursday morning, and Howard Voss looked like a man who hadn't slept in 4 days because he hadn't. His eyes were red at the rims. His collar was open. There was a coffee stain on his left cuff that he either hadn't noticed or had stopped caring about somewhere around 3 a.m. He set the report on Adrian's desk with both hands, the way you'd set down something you were afraid might detonate, and then he stood back and waited. Adrian read the cover summary. Then he read it again. Then he set it down and looked at Howard with the particular kind of stillness that, in the Callaway organization, preceded very bad things happening to people. "Talk me through it," Adrian said. Howard pulled at his collar. "The $14.7 million we flagged last week. That's the surface. The forensic team went 3 layers deeper over the past 72 hours. He paused, wet his lips. "The total exposure is closer to $31 million. The number sat in his room like a physical object. Adrian didn't react. He didn't move. His breathing stayed even. But somewhere behind his eyes, something shifted, and Howard, who had worked for Adrian Calloway for 6 years and survived 3 federal investigations and 2 internal purges, felt the hair on his arms stand up. 31, Adrian repeated. Yes. From how many accounts? 14. Across 6 different shells. The movement pattern it's not random, Adrian. It's sequential. Each transfer is structured to stay just below the threshold that would trigger automatic regulatory flags. Whoever designed this knows our compliance architecture. They know our reporting thresholds. They know the exact timing windows between our internal audits. They know because they were inside, Adrian said. His voice was flat as asphalt. That's the only explanation that fits. Adrian stood, walked to the window. The morning was pale and cold, the sky the color of old dishwater. He pressed one hand against the glass and felt the chill seep into his palm. Can you reverse the transfers? Howard's silence was its own answer. Adrian turned. Some of it, Howard said carefully. Maybe half. The rest has moved through enough intermediary channels that recovering it would require legal action in multiple jurisdictions, which means making our financial structure public record. Yes, the word fell between them like a door closing. Find me one name, Adrian said. One person, inside or outside this organization, whose fingerprints are on any part of this. One name, Howard. That's what I need from you. Howard nodded and left without speaking. His footsteps down the corridor were quick, almost running, the sound of a man putting distance between himself and something dangerous. Adrian remained at the window. His hand was still flat against the glass. Outside, the city was waking up, taxis accelerating, pedestrians materializing on sidewalks, the whole vast machine grinding back into motion. He watched it and felt nothing that resembled calm. His phone buzzed on the desk. He crossed the room and looked at the screen. Marcus. Tell me something useful, Adrian said. Bain pulled out. Adrian went still. What? Jeffrey Bain, 40 minutes ago. His office sent over a formal withdrawal notice. Full exit from the West Side development deal. Legal language is clean, force majeure clause, blah blah. But the timing isn't coincidental. Bain's investment in the West Side project represented $47 million in committed capital. Without it, the project's financing structure collapsed. Without the project, 3 related real estate deals that depended on its cash flow also collapsed. Adrian did the arithmetic in his head in about 4 seconds and felt the number land in his gut like a fist. Get me in a room with Bain today, Adrian said. I tried. His assistant said he's unavailable, not busy. Unavailable. There's a difference. I know the difference. There's more, Marcus said. And the way he said it, 2 words, perfectly level, told Adrian that the more was worse than everything that had come before. I made contact with someone inside the Harrington auction house, a junior executive I've used before for information. She owes me. And? The Harrington auction in 3 weeks. The featured centerpiece of the evening, the headline piece they've been marketing for 6 months, is a 19th century European oil painting, museum quality, projected closing price between $40 and $60 million. Adrian waited. The painting is on loan from a private collection, Marcus continued. Listed in the event catalog as being provided courtesy of an anonymous foundation. My contact got me the actual provenance paperwork. Marcus. It's from the Whitmore Legacy Collection, Adrian. The silence that followed was absolute. Vivian is lending the headline piece to the Harrington auction, Adrian said slowly. She's not just lending it. My contact says Vivian Whitmore has been involved in the planning of this event for over a year. She's on the organizing committee. She has final approval over the benefactor list. She helped structure the financial guarantee underwriting the entire night. Adrian sat down. The leather of his chair received him like something inevitable. He pressed his thumb and forefinger against the bridge of his nose and breathed through the pressure building behind his eyes. And we're on the benefactor list, he said. Your mother confirmed it 6 months ago, before the divorce. The Calloway family is listed as a contributing sponsor of the Harrington event. He lowered his hand, stared at the ceiling. She knew we'd be there. She knew before you knew you'd be there. The implication of that sentence opened in Adrian's mind like a trapdoor. He had a sudden vertiginous sensation of looking back through 3 years of marriage and seeing for the first time that the woman he had treated like furniture had been watching everything with perfect clarity. Every meeting she'd been present for, every conversation conducted in her proximity, every financial decision made in the penthouse she had lived in for 3 years. How much did she see? He asked. Not to Marcus, to himself. But Marcus answered anyway. Everything, I'd guess. Adrian's jaw tightened until the muscle in his cheek jumped. I want everything you can find on the Whitmore Legacy Foundation before the end of business today. Corporate structure, board members, asset holdings, everything. I'm already on it. And Marcus. The tone of his voice changed, something colder moving into it, the way cold moves into a room when a window opens. Find out if she's the one moving the money, if there's a connection between the transfers and anything attached to her. A pause on Marcus's end, brief but real. You think she's been doing this since the divorce? I think, Adrian said, that I don't know what she's been doing, and that's the problem. The family meeting happened that afternoon, in the east sitting room, with the rain back outside and the fire going in the fireplace beneath the painting that had started all of this. Adrian, Evelyn, and Madison. No assistants, no lawyers, no Marcus. Just the three of them and the particular suffocating tension that had been living in the penthouse ever since Vivian walked out of it. Madison arrived first. She came in fast, heels sharp on the hardwood, color high in her cheeks. She had been managing the nonprofit foundations all morning and had apparently spent that time catastrophizing. The gala, she said, before anyone else spoke. 3 of our corporate sponsors called this morning. They want to know if the news coverage about the harbor project is going to affect their association with us. Tell them it's routine, Evelyn said from her chair. I told them it was routine. 2 of them didn't believe me. One of them asked to postpone their sponsorship payment pending clarification. Then we'll replace them. With what? Our donor pipeline is... Evelyn, the way this morning has gone, I don't think we should be telling people it's routine. It doesn't feel routine. Madison turned to Adrian, who was standing by the fireplace. How bad is it? Adrian looked at his sister. The fire beside him threw uneven light across his face, carving shadows into the angles of it. It's manageable, he said. That's not an answer. It's the answer I'm giving you. Madison's jaw tightened. She looked between her brother and her mother. This is about her. This is about Vivian. Don't look at me like that, Evelyn. You're both thinking it. The timing, the accounts, the investors pulling back. All of it starting after she walked out of here. That's not coincidence. We don't know, Adrian began. Don't! Madison's voice cracked, not with weakness, with fury. Don't manage me right now. I'm not a sponsor you need to calm down. I'm family. So tell me the truth. Is Vivian Whitmore doing this to us? The fire popped. A log shifted, sending a brief column of sparks up the flue. Adrian exhaled. We don't have proof. But you think she is? He didn't answer, which was its own answer. Madison paced to the window and back. Her hands were in fists at her sides, tight, white-knuckled. 3 years? She said. Quieter now, the fury compressing into something harder. 3 years she sat at our table. She ate our food. She lived in this house, and we didn't know who she was. We knew who she presented herself to be, Evelyn said. Her voice was composed, but there was steel in every syllable. There's a distinction. There's no distinction that helps us now. There is if you want to understand how this happened and prevent it from happening again. Evelyn turned her gaze to Adrian. I made calls this morning. I spoke to Constance Hargrove at the Cultural Alliance. She confirmed that Vivian Whitmore has operated in institutional art finance circles for at minimum the past decade. She is known, respected, influential. Her foundation is one of the most significant private art holdings in North America. Madison stopped pacing. That's impossible. When she married into this family, she had nothing. She appeared to have nothing, Evelyn corrected. Those are very different things, Madison, and we should know the difference. We have spent 30 years building exactly that kind of appearance ourselves. The room went quiet. The fire crackled. Outside, rain ran down the glass in crooked lines. She built a cover, Madison said slowly. The words came out like she was assembling something she didn't want to be assembling. The quiet wife, the unremarkable background, The... She stopped. Her face changed. She was inside this family for 3 years. She had access. She saw everything. Yes, Evelyn said, and we handed it to her. Madison turned to Adrian, and something raw and ugly moved across her face. Not just anger, shame. The particular shame of someone who has been mocking a person they didn't understand. We handed it to her and never once looked at what she was actually doing, what she was actually seeing. Adrian said nothing. Adrian, his sister's voice dropped. What did she take? Not just the money. What did she see that she can use? The question hung in the air. I don't know yet, Adrian said. You need to find out. I know. And then you need to stop her. Madison's eyes were hard, locked on his, the familiar Calloway hardness that ran in all three of them. Whatever it takes. Madison, Evelyn began. Whatever it takes, Adrian. Because if we let a woman we dismissed as nobody dismantle this family, then everything we've built, everything Dad built, it means nothing. We mean nothing. She left the room. Her footsteps were slower going out than they had been coming in. The fury was still there, but underneath it something heavier, something that on another person might have been fear. Evelyn watched the door close. Then she turned to her son. She's not entirely wrong, she said, but she's thinking about it the wrong way. What's the right way? Evelyn folded her hands in her lap, composed, careful. The right way is to understand that if Vivian Whitmore is as connected as she appears to be, a frontal attack will only accelerate our exposure. She would have anticipated that. She would have prepared for it. A pause. The question isn't how do we stop her? The question is, what does she want? Adrian looked at his mother. She wants to humiliate us, he said. No. Evelyn shook her head, slow, certain. Humiliation requires emotion. What I saw in that woman when she signed those papers wasn't emotional. It was strategic. She doesn't want revenge, Adrian. She wants something specific, something concrete. She paused. I think she wants to prove something, and I think she's going to do it at Harrington. The Harrington auction, 3 weeks away. Adrian stood at the fireplace, looked up at the painting above it. The old oil masterpiece that the Calloways kept not because they understood it, but because they could. Hundreds of pounds of canvas and paint and history owned by people who had never looked at it closely enough to ask what it was worth. Beautiful collection. I wonder how much longer your family will be able to keep it. He had thought it was a threat. Now he was starting to think it was something worse. A statement of fact. Marcus brought the financial dossier on the Whitmore Legacy Foundation at 7 p.m. that evening. He came alone, no assistant, no driver, no peripheral personnel. He sat across from Adrian in the study and placed a manila folder on the desk between them. Thick, tabbed, annotated in Marcus's tight, economical handwriting along the margins. The foundation is legitimate, Marcus said. Registered nonprofit with full IRS compliance. Been operating continuously for 22 years. Originally founded by Vivian's grandfather, a man named Edmund Whitmore, who made his money in industrial shipping in the 1960s and 70s, and converted a substantial portion of that wealth into art acquisition starting in the 1980s. And Vivian? She took operational control of the foundation 8 years ago, after completing a graduate program in international finance at a private institution in Geneva. Not a famous school, very small, very selective, the kind of program that costs more per semester than most people earn in a decade and doesn't advertise itself. Marcus flipped to a flagged page. Her investment track record over the last 8 years is significant. The foundation's asset base has grown from approximately $280 million to just under $900 million under her management. She did that through a combination of acquisitions, strategic sales, and private equity partnerships that are, he paused, choosing the word, sophisticated, beyond sophisticated. Adrian looked at the numbers on the page, read them again. She's been doing this the entire time we were married, he said. Yes, and we never... No. How? Not an accusation directed at Marcus, just the question itself, raw and disbelieving. How did we miss this? We background check everyone who comes within 10 feet of this family. We checked Vivian Whitmore, the financial planner from Grayson and Associates, Marcus said quietly. We never knew to check Vivian Whitmore, the foundation director. Different professional track, different financial identity, same legal person, but she kept them completely separated. He paused. Honestly, Adrian, it's one of the cleanest information compartmentalizations I've ever seen. Whoever helped her build that structure knew exactly what they were doing. Find out who helped her. I'm working on it. Marcus flipped to another tab. The South Miami Harbor Project. Adrian's attention sharpened. The redevelopment project that the Callaway organization has been targeting for the past 18 months. The one that represents, according to your own internal projections, the single most significant expansion opportunity for the family in the next decade. I know what it is, Marcus. Then you need to know this. Marcus's voice stayed level, but his eyes were steady in a way that meant he was working to keep them that way. The project is being financed through a consortium of private investors. The debt structure is layered: senior tranche, mezzanine, junior. Standard for a project of this size. He tapped the page. The controlling position in the mezzanine tranche, the layer that effectively determines who holds decision-making authority over the project's financial future, was acquired 6 months ago by a private holding company registered in Delaware. The room contracted. Adrian felt it. The holding company is called White Legacy Capital, Marcus said. It took me most of today to trace the ownership structure. 7 layers of subsidiaries, meticulous, clean, almost impossible to crack. Marcus. The beneficial owner of White Legacy Capital is Vivian Whitmore. The words fell into the silence of the study and detonated. Adrian stood up. Not from agitation, from the physical need to be vertical, to be standing on solid ground, to feel the floor beneath his feet. He walked to the window. His reflection was there again, dark, precise, contained, but for the first time he looked at it and didn't recognize the certainty in the face looking back at him. She controls the project, he said. The mezzanine tranche gives her effective veto authority over any major financing decision. If she calls the debt or restructures the terms, the whole project collapses. The senior investors walk. Every downstream deal that depends on Harbor goes with it. Adrian pressed both palms against the windowsill. His knuckles went white. For how long? He asked. How long has she held that position? 6 months. The acquisition was executed 4 months before you filed for divorce. 4 months before. 4 months before he handed her divorce papers. 4 months before she sat across from him and signed them without a tremor, without a tear, without a single indication that she was walking out of his penthouse with a loaded gun already pointed at everything he planned to build next. She had known. Before he decided to end the marriage, she had already positioned herself. Before he sat down with his lawyers to draft the papers, she had already acquired the debt. Before he arranged the family meeting, before he practiced his flat, dismissive tone, before he sat across from her in the firelight and waited for her to break. She had already won. Adrian's breathing was controlled, slow, deliberate. The discipline of a man who had spent years training himself not to show damage in front of anyone. But inside, behind the composure, something was crumbling. Not from fear of losing the Harbor Project, though that fear was real and significant. From something more fundamental, from the recognition that someone had been in the room with him, sitting at his table, sleeping in his house, breathing his air, for 3 full years, and he had never once seen her clearly. One more thing, Marcus said. His voice was quiet now. Careful. The voice of a man delivering the last piece of a message he wishes he didn't have to give. Adrian turned from the window. The Harbor Project acquisition. The timing. 6 months ago. Marcus met his eyes. I cross-referenced it against our internal financial records. The $31 million in unauthorized transfers from our accounts. What about it? The first transfer occurred 6 months and 3 days after Vivian acquired the Harbor debt position. The silence was complete. She funded it, Adrian said. Not a question, not quite an accusation, just the structure of something becoming clear. She used capital from the foundation to acquire the debt position, and then she started pulling from our accounts to... He stopped. The architecture of it was assembling itself in his mind in real time, and what it was assembling into was something so precise, so methodical, so utterly without wasted motion that it took his breath away. She's not destroying us, he said slowly. She's buying us. She's using our own money to finance her control over our most important asset. Marcus said nothing. because there was nothing useful to say. Adrian stood in the center of his study. The fire had gone to embers. The rain was steady outside. Somewhere in this city, or beyond it, Vivian Whitmore was preparing for an auction that she had helped build, featuring a painting from a collection she controlled, surrounded by people who respected her in ways Adrian had never known and never tried to know. And in 3 weeks, she was going to walk into the Harrington Ballroom, and he was going to be there, waiting for her. Except it occurred to him now, with the cold clarity of a man who has finally read the room correctly, that he wasn't waiting for her at all. She had been waiting for him all along. Adrian sat with that sentence for 3 days. He didn't sleep much. He ate when Marcus put food in front of him and forgot about it the moment Marcus left the room. He held meetings with Howard, with his legal team, with the 2 remaining investors who hadn't yet pulled their capital, and he said the right words in the right order and watched people nod and felt nothing behind his own eyes except the slow, relentless turning of a single question he couldn't stop asking himself. How long had she known? Not about the divorce, not about the papers. How long had she known what kind of man she was married to, what kind of family she had walked into, what kind of machine was grinding away beneath the polished surface of the Callaway empire? How long had she sat at his dinner table, quiet and unremarkable and completely invisible, and cataloged every weakness, every crack, every pressure point with the patience of someone who understood that the most dangerous move in any game is the one your opponent doesn't see coming because they're too busy looking at themselves? 3 years. The answer was 3 years. Maybe longer, if you counted the months before the marriage when his father had arranged the match, and nobody had bothered to look past the surface of a file that told them exactly what they wanted to hear. On the 4th day, Howard Voss found the name. He came into Adrian's office at 8 a.m., looking like a man who had survived something and wasn't sure whether to feel relieved or terrified. He had the name on a single sheet of paper. He set it on Adrian's desk and stood back and said nothing, because the name spoke for itself. Adrian looked at the paper. The name on it was Raymond Cho. Raymond Cho, age 51. Senior account manager for the Callaway organization. 11 years of service, trusted, vetted, invisible in the way that only truly useful people are invisible. The kind of person who knows where everything is and how everything works and never draws attention to himself because drawing attention is not what he's paid to do. Raymond Cho, who had processing access to 9 of the 14 compromised accounts. Raymond Cho, who had taken 3 personal days in the past 6 weeks and whose badge access log showed him entering the building twice after midnight in the month prior to the first unauthorized transfer. Raymond Cho, who, and this was the detail that tightened Adrian's chest into something that felt like a vice, had a sister named Clara Cho, who worked as a junior curator at a private art foundation in Chicago. The Whitmore Legacy Foundation. Adrian read the paper twice. Then he folded it once, cleanly, along the center crease and placed it in the inside pocket of his jacket, against his chest, where he could feel it. "Where is he now?" Adrian asked. "He came in this morning," Howard said. "He's at his desk." "Don't let him leave." Howard left. Marcus appeared in the doorway 30 seconds later, as if he'd been standing just outside it, which he probably had. Marcus had a particular talent for being exactly where he needed to be without being asked. It was one of the things that made him indispensable and, in certain lights, unsettling. "Cho," Adrian said, "I heard. I want to talk to him, privately. The conference room on 14. Not the main one. The back one. No windows." Marcus nodded and was gone. Raymond Cho arrived in the 14th floor conference room 12 minutes later. He was a compact man, neatly dressed, with close-cropped hair and the kind of face that was designed by nature to be forgotten. He'd spent 11 years cultivating that quality. But when he walked through the conference room door and found Adrian Callaway sitting alone at the table with nothing in front of him, no laptop, no documents, no phone, just his hands flat on the table and his eyes fixed on the door, Raymond Cho's carefully maintained composure showed its first crack. It was small, a tightening around the jaw. A half-second hesitation before he crossed to the chair across from Adrian and sat down. Small things. But Adrian had spent his entire adult life reading small things, and he read them now with the focused precision of a man who has nothing left to be distracted by. "Raymond," Adrian said. His voice was conversational, almost warm. That was the tell, if Raymond had been paying attention. Adrian's voice only went warm when something was about to go very wrong. Mr. Calloway, Raymond's voice was steady, points to him for that. How long have you worked for this organization? 11 years? 11 years. Adrian nodded slowly, as if considering this for the first time. And in 11 years, would you say I've treated you fairly? Raymond's eyes moved, a quick involuntary flicker to the left toward the door. Yes. Good compensation, stability, safety? Yes. Then help me understand something. Adrian leaned forward just slightly, just enough to change the geometry of the room. Because I'm looking at our financial records, and I'm seeing a pattern of transfers that I cannot explain, and the pattern keeps leading me back to accounts that you have access to. And I don't know what to do with that, Raymond, because I've trusted you for 11 years, and I would very much like you to explain it to me before I have to draw my own conclusions. The silence that followed lasted approximately 4 seconds, long enough for Raymond Cho to make a decision, long enough for whatever he'd been holding together to begin its quiet collapse. I didn't have a choice, Raymond said. The words came out flat, resigned, like a man dropping a weight he'd been carrying too long. Adrian said nothing. He waited. The most powerful thing in any interrogation is silence, and Adrian had always known how to use it. She reached out to me 14 months ago, Raymond said. He wasn't looking at Adrian anymore, he was looking at the table. Through my sister. Claire didn't know what it was. She just passed along a message, a meeting request, from a woman named Vivian Whitmore. And you went. I went. His jaw worked. She knew things. Before I even sat down across from her, she laid out. She had documentation, transfers I'd made 7 years ago, off the books, a situation I'd handled for your father that was never supposed to be in writing anywhere. He stopped, swallowed. If it came out, I'd lose everything, more than everything. So she had leverage on you. Yes. And you gave her access. Raymond's hands, flat on the table, curled slowly into fists. Not all at once. She was careful, incremental. She never asked for more than I could give without triggering internal review. She knew your compliance systems better than I did. She knew exactly how much she could take, and when, and through which channels. Bosses. He finally looked up. His eyes were red at the edges, not from crying, from not sleeping, from carrying something too heavy for too long. She told me that when it was done, she would make sure the documentation disappeared, that I would be clear. And you believed her. Raymond said nothing, which meant yes, which meant he had made the oldest mistake in the book. He'd trusted a person with leverage over him to release that leverage once they had what they wanted. As if leverage ever gets released. As if a weapon ever becomes unnecessary to the person holding it. Adrian sat back. He looked at Raymond Cho, this man who had worked for his family for 11 years, who had been a ghost in the machine, invisible and reliable and completely unknown, and felt something he hadn't expected to feel. Not anger, not betrayal. Something colder, something that recognized itself, that saw in Raymond Cho the same vulnerability that existed in every person who had ever been close to the Calloway family. The knowledge that proximity to power was not the same as safety. That working for men like the Calloways didn't protect you. It just meant you had more to lose when it all went wrong. How much does she know? Adrian asked. Not the accounts, not the money, the other things. The parts of this organization that aren't in any financial record. Raymond's face did something complicated. She asked questions. Over the 14 months. About the structure. About the external relationships. About... He stopped. Raymond, the Harbor Project. He said it quietly. She asked about the Harbor Project 8 months ago. She wanted to know the acquisition timeline, the financing structure, who the key parties were, what their thresholds were, how the decision-making authority was distributed. 8 months ago. 2 months before she quietly acquired the controlling mezzanine position. She had used Raymond to map the terrain before she moved in. Adrian stood. He walked to the door, opened it, and said 2 words to Marcus, who was standing in the hallway. Sit with him. He walked down the corridor and into the elevator and rode it up to the 42nd floor in complete silence. And when the doors opened, he walked directly to his study and closed the door behind him and stood in the center of the room and did something he had not done since the night his father died. He allowed himself for exactly 60 seconds to feel the full weight of what was happening to him. Not the financial exposure, not the investor withdrawals, not the Raymond Cho situation or the Harbor Project or the $31 million or any of the specific, manageable, solvable, tactical problems arrayed against him. The thing underneath all of it. The thing that had been growing since the moment Vivian picked up his pen and signed his papers without a tremor. He had married a woman and lived with her for 3 years and never known her. Not even close. He had looked at her every day and seen exactly what he expected to see. A quiet, unremarkable, grateful woman existing on the periphery of his important life. And it had not once occurred to him to look harder, to ask more, to treat her as someone worth understanding. And she had used that. His arrogance was the key she'd turned to open every door. 60 seconds. He gave himself that. Then he straightened, rolled his neck, felt the vertebrae pop in sequence, breathed. The Harrington auction was in 11 days. His phone rang. He looked at the screen. His mother. He answered. "I know about Cho." Evelyn's voice was steady in the way stone is steady. Not because it's unaffected, but because it has compressed everything into density. "Then you know the scope." "I'm beginning to." "Adrian." A pause. In 20 years, he could count on one hand the number of times his mother had paused before speaking. "There's something else, something I should have told you sooner. I didn't because I didn't believe it was relevant. I understand now that it was." He sat down. The leather received him. "Tell me." "The first year of your marriage. The situation with the Reston Group. The investment collapse." He knew what she was referring to. The Reston Group had been a private equity situation gone sideways, a $60 million investment in a consortium of commercial properties that had begun hemorrhaging value due to a series of zoning disputes and environmental review complications. It had been one of the most dangerous financial moments of his tenure as family head. Not because of the loss itself, but because of what losing $60 million at that particular moment, early in his leadership, when his authority was still being tested internally, would have done to his standing with the organization's senior partners. The situation had resolved. Quietly, suddenly, completely. The zoning disputes had evaporated. The environmental reviews had been expedited. The consortium had stabilized. Adrian had attributed it to his lawyers and his political contacts working in concert. "What about Reston?" he asked. "I got a call last week from the attorney who managed the zoning resolution. He's retiring. He wanted to—" A pause. "He wanted to make sure the family knew. He said he felt it was important that the right people were aware of who had actually facilitated the resolution." Something cold moved through Adrian's chest. "It wasn't your lawyers," Evelyn said, "and it wasn't your political contacts. Someone reached into that situation from outside the organization and restructured the review process through a series of private back-channel relationships with the relevant municipal authorities, relationships that your lawyers didn't have and couldn't have built." "Who?" But he already knew. He'd known the moment she started the sentence. The attorney said the back-channel facilitation came through a private advisory connected to a foundation. He didn't have the full picture, but the name he was given, the name that opened the doors— "Vivian," Adrian said. "Yes." He pressed his free hand flat against the desk, pressed hard, felt the edge of the wood cut into his palm. "She fixed it," he said. "She fixed the Reston situation. From inside this marriage, she reached outside this organization and fixed a $60 million crisis, and nobody knew. Nobody told me. Nobody knew to tell you. She didn't tell anyone. She just did it, and walked back into the house and sat at your dinner table and said nothing. The fire in the study was low. Outside, the sky was the color of concrete. Adrian stared at the wall and felt the architecture of the past 3 years rearranging itself around him. Every quiet evening, every dinner, every morning where she was simply there, present and peripheral and easy to overlook, and saw in each of them the possibility of something he had been too blind, too certain, too suffocatingly self-satisfied to notice. She hadn't just been watching, she had been working. Inside his marriage, inside his house, inside the daily machinery of his life, she had been quietly solving problems he didn't know existed and building influence he'd never thought to credit her for. His empire had benefited from her, concretely, measurably. And he had not only failed to notice, he had handed her divorce papers. "There's more," Evelyn said. Her voice was different now. Something had gone out of it. Something that in another woman might have been called certainty. The attorney mentioned something else, about a second situation, the labor dispute with the freight consortium. 3 years ago. Adrian went completely still. The freight consortium labor dispute had been existential. A coordinated work stoppage across 3 major ports that the Callaway organization controlled. It had lasted 11 days before it was mysteriously resolved through back-channel negotiation that Adrian's team had taken credit for internally. "Her?" he said. "Her." He set the phone on the desk. Didn't hang up, just set it down and stared at it. He could hear his mother's breathing through the speaker, measured and controlled, the breath of a woman holding herself together through sheer accumulated discipline. 2 crises. 2 situations that had threatened the foundation of the Callaway empire during the most vulnerable period of his leadership. 2 quiet resolutions that everyone inside the organization had attributed to Adrian's management. His reputation had been built, in part, on solving those crises. His authority had been consolidated, in part, by surviving them. And she had been behind both of them, not for him. He understood that with a clarity that was almost physical, not out of loyalty or love or investment in his success. She had done it because she was operating on a timeline of her own, a plan that required the Callaway organization to remain functional and financially stable until she was ready, until she had everything positioned, until the Harbor Project debt was acquired and the Harrington auction was organized and Raymond Cho had transferred enough capital and the investors were primed and the ground was prepared. She had kept his empire alive because she needed it alive, because a collapsed Callaway organization was worth nothing to her, because what she was building required something to dismantle publicly, at the right moment, in front of the right people. And that moment was 11 days away. Adrian picked the phone back up. "Mother, I need you to listen to me carefully." "I'm listening." "I'm going to the Harrington auction." Silence. "Adrian, I'm going. Not to stop her, not to threaten her, because she's going to be there with everything she's built, and I need to see it. I need to understand what I'm dealing with before I can do anything about it." He paused. "And because if I don't show up, she wins by default. And I will not give her that." Evelyn said nothing for a long moment. He could hear the fire in her sitting room, the same family tick, keeping fires burning even when the weather didn't call for it, a habit from William's era that none of them had ever broken. "There's something you need to understand going in," Evelyn said finally. "Something the attorney confirmed and that I've had verified through 2 additional sources today." "What?" "The Whitmore Legacy Collection, the art foundation she controls, the assets, the influence, the international relationships." A breath. "She didn't build that during your marriage, Adrian. She didn't even build it in the 2 years before it. The foundation has been in operation for over 2 decades. Her grandfather built the foundation, her father built it further, and Vivian has been managing it for 8 years. I know that, Marcus." "What you don't know?" Evelyn said, and her voice had gone to its flattest, most careful register. The register she used when she was about to say something that could not be unsaid, is what our family's attorney found in the original marriage arrangement documentation, the paperwork your father handled before he died. Adrian's hand tightened on the phone. "Your father knew who she was," Evelyn said. "He knew about the foundation. He knew about her real background. He arranged the marriage not because he thought she was nobody. He arranged it because he thought..." She stopped, started again. "He thought she would be an asset, that her connections, her influence, her financial relationships would strengthen the Callaway position if she were inside the family. He knew." Adrian's voice was barely above a whisper. "He knew. And he told no one. Not me, not you, not the lawyers. He kept it to himself, the way he kept everything to himself when he thought he was being clever." A long pause. "I think he believed he could manage her, that bringing her into the family would bring her capabilities into the family's service. Instead, he brought in someone who spent 3 years deciding whether we were worth saving or worth destroying." Adrian's voice came from somewhere very deep and very cold. "And she made her decision." "Yes," Evelyn said. "I believe she did." He hung up. sat in the silence of the study. The fire was nearly dead, just orange coals now, pulsing in the dark grate. His face felt tight. His hands were steady, which surprised him because inside his chest something was moving that felt less like emotion and more like tectonic shift, the slow, irreversible displacement of one structure by another. His father had known, had seen the opportunity, had reached for it with the confident, careless arrogance of a man who believed he was always the smartest person in any arrangement, and had handed his son a marriage to a woman whose capabilities dwarfed everything William Calloway had ever built, and had said nothing. And Vivian Whitmore had walked into this family with her eyes open, knowing she was being used, knowing exactly what the Calloways saw when they looked at her and what they couldn't see. And she had spent 3 years making her decision, and now Adrian Calloway had 11 days to make his. He spent the first 3 of those days doing something he had never done in his adult life. He stopped moving. He stopped issuing orders and holding meetings and filling the air with the noise of management. He sent Marcus home. He told Howard to hold all reports until further notice. He let the phones ring. He sat in the study with the dead fire and the signed divorce papers still in the leather folder on the corner of his desk, and he thought, not strategically, not tactically. He thought the way a man thinks when the scaffolding he's been standing on his entire life has just been revealed to be someone else's architecture. He thought about his father, about a dying man who had seen a brilliant woman and reached for her like a chess piece, certain he could control what he couldn't understand. He thought about 3 years of dinners where Vivian sat at the far end of the table and said measured, quiet things that nobody listened to because nobody thought she was worth listening to. He thought about the Reston Group, the Freight Consortium. $31 million moved through 14 accounts with surgical precision by a woman who had also, simultaneously, been keeping his empire from collapsing at its most vulnerable seams. She had held him up with one hand and prepared his destruction with the other. And she had done it without hatred. That was the part he kept returning to. There was no hatred in what she had built. Hatred was sloppy. Hatred left fingerprints. What Vivian had constructed was something cleaner and more devastating than hatred. It was clarity. The absolute, unsentimental clarity of a person who had been underestimated so completely and for so long that they simply decided to let the underestimation become the weapon. On the 4th day, Adrian made a phone call, not to Marcus, not to his legal team, not to any of the investors or allies or lieutenants who orbited the Calloway empire. He called a number he had never called before, a number he had found in the original marriage arrangement documentation that his father's attorney had couriered over, the documentation that contained the one piece of information William Calloway had kept from everyone. The number connected to a woman named Eleanor Voss. No relation to Howard. Eleanor Voss was a private intermediary, the kind of person who existed in the space between powerful people who needed to communicate without communicating directly. She had facilitated the original marriage arrangement between William Calloway and the Whitmore family 8 years ago. She was 71 years old, operated out of a brownstone on the Upper West Side, and was, according to the attorney's notes, the only person alive who had been present in the room when both families agreed to the terms. She answered on the second ring. Her voice was dry, precise, unsurprised. "I wondered when you'd call," Eleanor Voss said. "Then you know why I'm calling." "I know what you think you know. That's different." A pause. The sound of something being set down. A cup, maybe. "Your father was a confident man, Mr. Calloway. Confidence in men like him is often indistinguishable from blindness." What did he miss? Everything that mattered. He saw a young woman with connections and capital and the kind of invisible influence that old money families cultivate over generations. And he thought he was acquiring an asset. He didn't understand that Vivian Whitmore agreed to that arrangement for her own reasons, which had nothing to do with his. What were her reasons? Eleanor Voss was quiet for a moment. "I'm not going to answer that. It's not mine to give. But I'll tell you this, because I think it's relevant to whatever you're planning for the Harrington auction." Another pause. Weighted. Deliberate. "Vivian Whitmore is not trying to destroy your family, Mr. Calloway. She never was. Destruction requires investment in the outcome. She has no investment in your family's suffering. She has an investment in her own future. Those are different things. You would do well to understand the distinction before you walk into that ballroom." She hung up. Adrian held the phone against his ear for 3 seconds after the line went dead, listening to the silence like it might still have something to tell him. Then he put the phone in his pocket and went to find Marcus. "We're going to Harrington," he said, "and we're going differently than we planned." Marcus looked at him, read whatever was in his face, nodded once. "Tell me what you need." The night of the Harrington International Auction arrived with the cold clarity of a blade. November in Manhattan, the sky perfectly black above the lit towers, the air carrying that particular edge that cut through even the heaviest wool. The auction house occupied a converted Beaux-Arts building on the Upper East Side, its limestone facade lit from below, black cars pulling to the curb in a steady, expensive procession. Security at the entrance was discreet but dense, men in dark suits with earpieces and the flat, watchful eyes of people paid to notice everything. Adrian arrived in a black town car with Marcus and two members of his security detail. He wore a dark charcoal suit, no tie, his posture carrying the particular weight of a man who has resolved something fundamental within himself and come out the other side of the resolution with nothing left to prove. He did not look like a man going to a social event. He looked like a man walking into the last room of a long hallway. The ballroom was already full when they entered. Crystal chandeliers threw warm light across 200 people. Museum directors, private collectors, international bankers, hedge fund principals, old money families who had been attending events like this for generations. The kind of room where net worth was assumed and influence was the only currency that mattered. The air smelled of cut flowers and something underneath it. Money, specifically. The particular airless quality of a space occupied by people who have never once in their lives had to check a price tag. Adrian knew perhaps 40 of the people in the room. He had done business with a dozen of them. He had cultivated 4 of them as long-term Callaway allies. But the room's social gravity was not oriented toward him. He felt it immediately, the way you feel a current in water before you understand which direction it's pulling. People were positioned, angled, their bodies oriented toward something on the far side of the ballroom. Conversations paused mid-sentence. Heads turned. There was a texture to the room's collective attention that Adrian had spent his whole career cultivating for himself, and tonight it was pointing somewhere else. He followed the current with his eyes. She was standing near the east windows in a group of 6 people that included the director of a major northeastern museum, 2 men Adrian didn't recognize but whose bearing telegraphed serious institutional weight, and a woman he identified after a moment as the head of international acquisitions for one of the largest sovereign wealth funds in the world. Vivian stood in the center of the group, not performing, not working the room the way people work rooms when they want to be seen. She was simply there, present. Listening to something one of the men was saying with the focused attention of someone who actually finds what they're hearing interesting. She wore midnight blue, simple cut, no excess. Her dark hair was down. He had almost never seen it down. And she looked. He searched for the right word and found it was the wrong kind of word for a man in his position. She looked entirely at home. Not comfortable in the anxious, effortful way people look comfortable when they're working at it. At home, the way water looks at home in a river, like the environment had been built around her rather than the other way around. She hadn't seen him yet, or she had seen him and chosen not to indicate it, which was entirely possible, and Adrian thought probably more likely. Marcus appeared at his elbow. "Archer's here. He's been in conversation with 2 people I don't recognize for the past 40 minutes. He arrived before us. Thomas Archer, one of the 3 investors who had issued the 1-week ultimatum and then quietly extended it when Adrian's team requested more time. Adrian located him across the room, the patrician silver hair, the straight-backed posture of a man who had attended gatherings like this since childhood. He was deep in conversation and hadn't looked up at Adrian's entrance. "LaSalle?" Adrian asked. "Far left, near the bar." Marcus kept his voice barely above a murmur. Professional, level. But his eyes were moving continuously, mapping the room, cataloging positions and exits, and the subtle social geometry of who was standing near whom. "He's been introduced to someone from the auction organizing committee." "By who?" "I'm working on that." The auction was scheduled to begin in 40 minutes. The headline piece, the 19th century oil painting from the Whitmore Legacy Collection, was displayed on the main stage at the front of the ballroom beneath specialized lighting that made its colors appear to breathe. Even from where Adrian stood, 40 feet away and surrounded by 200 people, the painting commanded the room. It was extraordinary. He could see that clearly, and the recognition cost him something. The acknowledgement that there were forms of value he had spent his entire life too certain of himself to understand. He began moving through the room, slowly, without apparent destination, stopping to exchange words with two people he knew well enough to greet, letting the social mechanics of the evening carry him in the direction he needed to go. Vivian still hadn't looked up. He was 12 feet away when the man she was speaking to, the one he didn't recognize, institutional weight, expensive watch, glanced over Vivian's shoulder and made eye contact with Adrian with the polite, blank expression of someone who doesn't know who they're looking at. Vivian tracked the man's gaze, turned. Their eyes met across the space between them. Neither of them moved. The ballroom noise continued around them. Conversation, clinks of glass, the discreet management of expensive things. But in the specific geography of that 12 feet, something happened that was quieter and more consequential than anything else occurring in the room. She looked at him the way she had always looked at him, without surprise, without anxiety, with the particular steadiness of a person who has long since made peace with every possible version of the moment they're standing in. He crossed to her. The group she was with shifted, not retreating, just reconfiguring the way social groups do when a variable is introduced. The museum director looked at Adrian with polite recognition. The others took fractional steps back. "Mr. Calloway," Vivian said. Her voice was even, not warm, not cold, present. "Vivian." He kept his voice the same. He was aware of Marcus positioned 8 feet behind him, aware of the room's peripheral attention beginning to orient toward this specific corner of it. "I didn't expect you to come," she said. "I think you did." A beat. Something moved in her eyes, quick, controlled, gone before he could name it. "Possibly," she said. The museum director, reading the room with the sensitivity of a man who had navigated institutional politics for decades, said something brief and cordial, and drew the rest of the group 6 feet further along the window bank, leaving Adrian and Vivian standing in a pocket of relative privacy in the middle of 200 people. "This is yours," Adrian said. He meant the room, the event, the painting on the stage, the whole constructed evening. "The foundation is a benefactor, yes. That's not what I said." She looked at him. Waiting. She had always been good at waiting. He understood that now in a way he hadn't before. That her silences weren't passivity. They were patience. And patience, applied with sufficient precision, was the most dangerous thing in the world. "The Harbor Project," Lee said. Quiet, direct. No performance. "The accounts, Raymond Cho. The Reston situation 3 years ago." He paused. "Let each item land. You weren't destroying us, you were positioning." She held his gaze. "Is that a question?" "It's an observation." "Then observe accurately." Her voice stayed low. No heat in it, no defensiveness. "I didn't move against your family, Adrian. I moved forward. Those aren't the same thing. They felt the same from where I was standing." "I know." A pause. Something shifted in her face, not softening, exactly. More like a door opening 1 inch, just enough to show that something real existed behind it. "That was your choice. To stand where you were standing and call everything that moved past you an attack." He felt that land in his chest, not because it was cruel, because it wasn't. "The things you fixed, Reston, the Freight Consortium, you did that for yourself, not for us. I did it because the organization needed to survive long enough for me to—" She stopped. "For you to what?" She looked away briefly, toward the painting on the stage, then back. "For me to be ready. For me to have everything in place. I needed time. And now you have it." "Yes," Adrian breathed. Slow and controlled, the way he'd been doing it all week, keeping the architecture of himself intact through sheer discipline. "Eleanor Voss told me something. She said you agreed to this marriage for your own reasons, not my father's." The name registered. A fractional tensing around Vivian's jaw. "You talked to Eleanor." "I found the documentation." She was quiet for a moment, long enough that the ambient noise of the ballroom seemed to get louder. "My grandfather built the foundation over 40 years. My father built it further, and when I took it over 8 years ago, I discovered that there were gaps. Real ones. Relationships I didn't have. Access I couldn't get alone no matter how much capital I deployed because some doors only open from certain angles." She paused. "Your father saw an opportunity. I saw the same opportunity. We just had different ideas about who was using whom. He thought he was using you. He thought he was very clever. Her voice carried no malice, just a dry, clear assessment of a dead man who had overestimated himself. He wasn't wrong that proximity to the Calloway name opened certain doors. He was wrong about what I was going to do once I walked through them. Adrian studied her face, the stillness in it, the absolute, undramatic certainty of a person who has done the thing they set out to do and is standing on the other side of it. What did you do? I built relationships, she said simply, inside your organization and outside it. I learned how the money moved. I learned who held what and why and at what price. I made myself useful to your empire in ways that nobody noticed because nobody thought to look. A pause. And I built my own position, quietly, carefully, in parallel. The harbor debt, among other things. You were going to do this regardless of the divorce. She met his eyes. The divorce accelerated the timeline. But yes, the end state was always the same. The ballroom shifted around them. Somewhere behind Adrian, he heard Thomas Archer's voice, a specific cadence in it that meant he was wrapping up a conversation. Time moving. The auction starting in 23 minutes. What do you want from tonight? Adrian asked. He heard something in his own voice that surprised him. Not surrender, not defeat, but something closer to honesty. The kind that only surfaces when everything else has been stripped away. Vivian looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked past him, toward the stage, toward the painting, toward the assembled weight of the room. I want what I've always wanted, she said, to be seen accurately, in the right room, by the right people. She brought her gaze back to his. Tonight, that happens. Before he could respond, a sound moved through the room. Not loud, just a shift in the collective attention, a redirecting of energy toward the main stage where the auction director was approaching the podium. The lights over the crowd dimmed slightly. The lights over the painting intensified. And then Marcus was at Adrian's elbow. His voice was a thread of sound, barely audible. You need to hear this, right now. Adrian kept his eyes on Vivian for one more second. Then he turned and followed Marcus to the edge of the room, into the space near the service corridor where the ambient noise was lower. Talk, Adrian said. Marcus's jaw was set. His eyes were doing the thing they did when the news was bad and he'd already processed it and moved past the reaction into pure function. I just got a call from our man in the municipal records office, the harbor project, the senior tranche financing, the layer above Vivian's mezzanine position. What about it? The senior lenders. We always assumed it was a consortium of 3 institutional funds. Our lawyers confirmed it 6 months ago. I know who the senior lenders are, Marcus. You know who they were. Marcus's voice dropped another register. 2 of the 3 have sold their positions in the last 30 days, transferred to a new holding entity registered in the Cayman Islands. My man just got the beneficial ownership disclosure. Adrian already knew what was coming. He felt it arriving the way you feel weather changing. The pressure shift, the particular stillness before the temperature drops. It's her, he said. White Legacy Capital acquired both senior positions. She doesn't just control the mezzanine, Adrian. She holds majority across the entire debt structure. She controls the whole project, not partially, completely. The words hit him in the solar plexus, not like a surprise because some part of him had been moving toward this understanding all week, but like the final confirmation of something you'd hoped might not be true. He pressed his back against the wall of the service corridor and breathed. The sound of the auction director's introduction floated from the ballroom through the partially open door. She didn't just outmaneuver us, Marcus said. His voice was quiet, not defeated, just accurate. She built a parallel acquisition structure and walked through our organization for 3 years and walked out with everything she needed to own the most important asset we ever targeted. And she did it while we were looking at everything except her. Adrian's jaw was iron. I know. Across the ballroom, through the open door, he could see the stage, the painting, the crowd oriented toward it with the collective attention of people witnessing something significant. And at the edge of his sightline, he could see the midnight blue of Vivian's dress as she moved through the crowd, not toward the stage, not toward the center of the room, but toward the table where Thomas Archer and Dominic LaSalle were now seated side by side. His investors. She's talking to Archer, Marcus said. He had followed Adrian's eyeline. And LaSalle. Adrian pushed off the wall, walked back into the ballroom. The auction director was speaking. Something about the evening's featured piece, the provenance, the significance. The crowd was rapt. 200 people facing forward toward the stage and the painting and the carefully managed drama of enormous sums of money changing hands in a civilized room. Adrian moved against the current, toward the table where his investors were sitting, toward Vivian. He was 15 feet away when he heard the auction director's voice shift, rising slightly, taking on the particular cadence of an announcement. He stopped, listened. "Before we open the evening's main event," the director said, "the Harrington organization is honored to share news of a significant development in the world of private real estate finance, which several members of tonight's audience will find of particular relevance. The completion of an acquisition that positions tonight's host foundation as a major stakeholder in one of the most anticipated urban development projects on the Eastern Seaboard." Adrian went cold. "The South Miami Harbor Redevelopment Project," the director continued, his voice carrying across 200 attentive, suddenly very alert faces, "has completed its financing restructure, with a controlling debt position now confirmed under the management of the Whitmore Legacy Foundation, represented tonight by its director." He didn't hear the rest of the sentence. He was looking at Thomas Archer, who was looking at the stage with an expression Adrian had never seen on his face before. The expression of a man reassessing every calculation he had made in the last month. He was looking at Dominic LaSalle, who had turned in his chair and was looking directly at Vivian with the frank, unguarded interest of a man who has just identified where the real power in a room is sitting. He was looking at the dozens of bankers and collectors and institutional money managers who were pulling out phones, leaning toward each other, beginning the rapid, irreversible process of updating their understanding of the landscape. And he was looking at Vivian, who had turned from the Archer LaSalle table and was now facing the stage, her back to Adrian, her posture perfectly still. She did not look triumphant. She didn't raise her hands or smile for the room or perform any version of victory. She just stood there in the warmth of the chandeliers while the room reorganized itself around her name and breathed. Adrian walked toward her. His footsteps were steady. His hands were at his sides. The room was moving around him. People turning, conversations fracturing and reassembling around this new information. But he moved through it like a man in a corridor, with singular direction and nothing left to calculate. He reached her, stopped 2 feet behind her. She turned before he spoke, as if she'd known he was there, as if she'd been expecting exactly this distance, exactly this moment. "Vivian," his voice was low, just for her. Her eyes were steady, clear, entirely without cruelty. "I need to know one thing," he said. His voice was barely holding its shape, not from emotion, but from the effort of compressing everything he understood now, everything he'd failed to understand before, into a single, navigable question. "The things you fixed, the crises you solved from inside this marriage, Reston, the labor dispute." He held her gaze. "Did you do it because the plan required us to stay solvent, or did you do it because—" "Adrian." She said his name with a precision that stopped him cold, not gently, not harshly, just accurately, the way you say a name when you need someone to actually hear it. He waited. She took one breath. Her eyes didn't move from his, and she said 4 words that hit him harder than anything else in the entire long trajectory of the worst month of his life. "Ask me at midnight." Then she turned toward the stage where the auction director was calling the room to attention, where the painting from the Whitmore Legacy collection blazed under the lights like something that had been... The auction opened at 9:47. The painting went up first, not as is traditional, saving the best for the climax, but because Vivian had structured the evening and she understood something that conventional auction houses didn't. The headline piece didn't need to be saved. It needed to set the tone. It needed to establish, in the first 15 minutes, exactly whose room this was and who was controlling the temperature inside it. The bidding opened at $18 million. Adrian stood near the back of the ballroom with Marcus beside him and watched the room do what rooms do when significant money starts moving. It contracted. 200 people became very still, very focused, the ambient social noise dropping away as if someone had turned a dial. Paddles lifted. Numbers climbed. The auction director's voice was practiced, smooth, carrying the particular urgency of a man paid to make silence feel expensive. 22 million, 27, 31. Adrian picked up a paddle, not because he had a strategy, not because he had calculated the outcome, because something in him, the part that was still the man who had stepped over his father's body and finished the negotiation, refused to stand in this room and do nothing. He raised it at 34 million. Vivian, from her position near the center left of the room, raised hers at 36. He felt the ripple move through the crowd. 200 people recalibrating, heads turning between the two of them the way heads turn at a tennis match, tracking the volley, sensing that what they were watching was not simply an auction. 38, 40, 43. Adrian raised at 43. His jaw was set. His hand was steady. Beside him, Marcus said nothing. Did not advise, did not caution, simply stood with his arms at his sides and let Adrian be whatever he needed to be in this moment. Vivian raised at 46. He looked at her across the ballroom. She was looking at the painting, not at him. Her paddle was down again, resting against her hip, and her face held that quality of absolute calm that he had spent 3 years misreading as vacancy and had finally come to understand was something closer to bedrock. She wasn't performing confidence. She was simply not afraid. Not of the number, not of him, not of any version of this evening that could possibly unfold. He raised at 49. She raised at 52 without hesitation, without looking at him. $52 million for a painting she had helped loan to the event in a room she had helped build, surrounded by people who knew her name and respected it in ways that had taken her 8 years of invisible, meticulous, unwitnessed work to earn. Adrian lowered his paddle, not from defeat, from something that took him a moment to identify, because it was a sensation he had almost no experience with. It was recognition. The clean, uncomplicated recognition that he was looking at someone who had won this specific thing before the evening began, and that continuing to bid was not strategy. It was ego. And ego, Adrian Calloway was finally beginning to understand, had been the most expensive habit of his life. The gavel came down at $52,300,000. The room exhaled. Then it began to applaud. Vivian did not raise her hand, did not acknowledge the room's attention with any gesture that could be read as theater. She handed her paddle to an assistant beside her and turned to the man on her left, the museum director, and resumed what appeared to be a conversation they had paused when the bidding started. Thomas Archer caught Adrian's eye from across the room. His expression was unreadable for a moment. Then he gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. Not an apology, not an acknowledgement of wrongdoing, just the nod of a man who has updated his understanding of a situation and is indicating that the update has occurred. Adrian nodded back. The language of men who operated in rooms like this, brief, sufficient, conclusive. Dominic LaSalle had already moved. Adrian watched him cross the room toward Vivian's position, watched the museum director step back fractionally to make space, watched LaSalle extend his hand and Vivian take it with the ease of someone accepting something she had expected. They spoke for less than a minute. Whatever was said, LaSalle left the exchange with an expression Adrian recognized from 100 negotiations. The expression of a man who has found a more interesting partner than the one he arrived with. Marcus put his hand briefly on Adrian's shoulder. Just for a second. No words. Then he withdrew it and took one step back, giving Adrian the privacy of his own stillness. The rest of the auction proceeded. Adrian stayed. He didn't bid again. He watched the room and let himself see it clearly, without the filter of his own importance. And what he saw was a landscape that had shifted fundamentally and irreversibly in the span of 90 minutes. Investors who had been Calloway aligned were now in extended conversation with Whitmore Foundation representatives. Bankers who had courted his family's business for years were introducing themselves to Vivian's circle with the forward-leaning posture of people seeking entry. The social gravity of the room had reorganized, and it had done so not through drama or confrontation, but through the quiet, overwhelming demonstration of accumulated influence. He had always believed that power made itself known through force, through the capacity for violence, for pressure, for consequences. His father had believed the same. The Calloway organization had been built on that belief. But standing in the Harrington ballroom at 11:47 p.m., watching the room orient itself around a woman who had never raised her voice or issued a threat or deployed a single gesture of aggression, Adrian Calloway confronted the possibility that he had spent his entire life understanding power incorrectly. At midnight, he went to find her. She was on the terrace. The building had a narrow stone terrace off the east side of the ballroom, accessible through a pair of tall glass doors that most guests didn't bother with on a cold November night. But Vivian was there, standing at the stone railing with a glass of water. Not wine, he noticed, water, looking out at the city. The skyline was the particular spectacular that Manhattan produced on clear, cold nights, all lit geometry against the black sky. He pushed through those glass doors. The cold hit him immediately. Real cold, the kind with teeth. He didn't have a coat. He'd left it inside. He didn't go back for it. His footsteps on the stone were audible. She turned before he reached the railing. She had known he was coming. He'd stopped being surprised by that. He stopped beside her, put his hands on the railing, felt the cold metal against his palms. Neither of them spoke for a moment. The city did its thing below them. Indifferent, continuous, vast. "You said to ask at midnight," he said. She set her glass on the railing. "Yes. The things you fixed during our marriage, Reston, the freight dispute." He looked at the city, not at her. "Was it only because you needed the organization to survive long enough for your timeline?" The silence lasted 5 full seconds. He counted them. He had a lifetime of practice reading silences, and this one was the kind that exists when a person is deciding not whether to tell the truth, but how much of it to give. "No," Vivian said. He turned his head, looked at her. Her face in the city light was different from how it looked in the ballroom. The warmth gone, the chandeliers gone, just the cold and the ambient glow of 10 million lit windows. Clearer, more honest. The room had required a version of her. The terrace required something else. The first time I intervened, Reston. Yes, it was strategic. The organization needed to stay functional. That was true. She looked at the railing. Her thumb moved across the metal surface, a small, unconscious gesture. But the freight dispute was different. By then, I had been inside your family for 18 months. I had watched you manage the situation incorrectly for 6 weeks. I watched you exhaust yourself and make 3 decisions in a row that came from pride rather than judgment. She paused. And I fixed it because... She stopped again. Because what? She looked up at him. Because you were a better operator than those 6 weeks showed. And I had enough invested in understanding you accurately that I didn't want a crisis you were mismanaging to become the definitive version of you in that room. The words hit him somewhere he hadn't expected. Not in the chest, lower, somewhere older. You were protecting my reputation, he said. I was protecting my investment. The correction was automatic. Then she caught herself. A fractional pause, a slight shift in her expression. And perhaps something else. I hadn't decided yet what I thought of you. I wanted more information. For 3 years? Some people take time to understand. Her voice was dry, not unkind. You're not a simple case, Adrian. He turned fully toward her. The cold was in his hands now, in his face, but he didn't move. What did you decide? At the end of 3 years? She looked at him steadily. The city hummed between them. I decided that you were a brilliant man who had never been required to look at anything except himself. Your family, your organization, the world you built, everything in it reflected your importance back at you. Nobody ever cost you the thing that mattered enough to make you stop and ask why. A pause. The divorce papers were the first thing in your life that required nothing from me. No performance, no reaction. And when I didn't give you one, it broke something open in you. I saw it, even then, even in that room. He thought about the moment, the pen on the table, her hand steady, the silence that had fallen over the room like a held breath. You planned for me to be at Harrington, he said. You planned for the announcement, the investors watching, the public realignment. He searched her face. Did you plan for this? The terrace, this conversation. Something moved in her eyes, small, real. No, she said. I planned to win the room. I didn't plan what happened afterward. A beat. You came to find me. That was yours. The distinction landed quietly. He stood with it. What happens to the harbor project, he said. Back to business. The reflex of a man who doesn't know how to stay in the unstructured space of an honest conversation for too long. She recognized it. He saw that she recognized it, and she let him have it, Let him move to the ground where he was more comfortable. The project moves forward, she said. The financing is sound. The development timeline is unchanged. With you as the controlling creditor? Yes. And the Callaways? She picked up her washer glass, held it without drinking. The Callaway organization has minority equity in the project. That remains. Nothing in my debt position eliminates your equity. She looked at him. I wasn't trying to erase you from the project, Adrian. I was trying to reposition the power balance. Those are different things. You keep making that distinction because you keep missing it. He pressed his palms flat against the railing. The cold was serious now, working through his jacket. What do you want from me? Not from the project, from me specifically. She was quiet for a moment. Nothing. That's not an answer. It's the only honest one. She turned to face him fully, her back to the railing, the city behind her. I don't need anything from you, Adrian. I haven't for a long time. What happened between us, the marriage, the divorce, tonight, none of it was about needing something from you. It was about demonstrating something to myself. And to the people in that room who needed to see it clearly. She paused. Your family spent 3 years telling me, without saying it directly, that I existed on the margin of your world, that I was there because I was useful to you and irrelevant everywhere else. A breath. I needed to correct that, for myself, not for you, by controlling the project, by being visible in my own right, in the rooms that matter to me, in the language that I speak. She held his gaze. The harbor project is a mechanism. The room tonight was a mechanism. What I was actually doing was... She stopped, looked for the right word. Becoming legible, becoming accurately seen, not performing something I'm not, being seen as what I actually am, which required removing myself from a position where your family's assumptions were the dominant frame. He was quiet for a long time. The city went on doing what cities do, indifferent and relentless. A siren somewhere, 30 stories below. A plane crossing the black sky to the north. I never looked at you, he said. The words came out stripped of everything except their content. No posture in them, no management. I looked in your direction and saw what I expected to see and stopped there. Every day for 3 years. She didn't respond immediately. Her expression didn't shift into sympathy or satisfaction. It stayed where it was, clear, a little tired, honest. No, she said. You didn't. That cost me. Yes, it did. It cost you something too. He wasn't asking. He was stating something he had arrived at slowly over the course of this conversation, and he wanted her to know he had arrived at it. She looked at him for a long time. The cold moved between them. Yes, she said finally, quietly. It did. What it had cost her. 3 years of invisibility inside a life that wasn't hers. 3 years of watching herself be looked past by people who should have known better. The specific and unrepeatable cost of being brilliant and unseen in a room full of people who could have recognized you if they'd bothered to try. He didn't ask her to enumerate it. The ledger was hers. He didn't have the right to audit it. I'm sorry, he said. She looked at him. He held the look. He didn't qualify the apology or contextualize it or soften it with explanation. It was the kind of sorry that comes from a man who has stopped protecting himself long enough to understand the specific shape of what he did. She absorbed it. He watched her absorb it. Not with forgiveness, not with warmth, but with the gravity that a real apology deserves when it's real. I know, she said. They stood at the railing for another minute, maybe 2. The cold had settled into him completely now, all the way through, but he didn't move. He wasn't ready to move yet. There was something about the honesty of the cold, the absence of comfort, the inability to pretend it wasn't there, that felt necessary. My mother said you weren't trying to destroy us, he said. Eleanor Voss said the same thing. Your mother is perceptive. A pause. I didn't want to destroy you, Adrian. Destruction is a waste. It leaves nothing to work with. She turned back to the railing, looking out. What I wanted was a world in which the Whitmore Foundation operated at its full capacity, with full visibility in every room that mattered, without having to be anyone's quiet wife, without having to compress myself into the margin of someone else's frame. She paused. That world exists now. Tonight created it. And the Callaways? The Callaway organization will survive this, not unchanged. You'll have to rebuild some relationships. You'll have to restructure around the harbor financing terms. It will take time. She glanced at him sideways. But you're good at restructuring, Adrian. You've done it before. You'll do it again. Another pause. Perhaps better this time, with a slightly more accurate map of the territory. Something in his chest shifted. Not warmth exactly. Not relief. Something more complicated. The particular quality of pain that contains within it the first suggestion of a different future. He hadn't felt that specific sensation in so long that he'd almost forgotten it was possible. He pushed back from the railing. "There's something I need to tell you," he said. She waited. "The things you fixed during our marriage, the crises." He looked at the city. "I took credit for all of them. Internally, with the organization, it was my leadership, my management. That's the story everyone inside the Callaway structure has been told for 3 years." He paused. "That ends. I'm going to correct the record. Internally. I don't know if it matters to you, but I'm going to do it." She was very still beside him. "It matters," she said. And for the first time in this conversation, in this evening, in perhaps 3 years, her voice carried something that he recognized as unguarded. Brief, small, real. He nodded, put his hands in his pockets. The cold was total now, all the way to the bone. Inside the ballroom, through the glass doors, he could see the event winding toward its conclusion. People collecting coats. Conversations held standing instead of seated. The particular late evening loosening of a formal gathering approaching its end. "What happens next?" he asked. "After tonight, in practical terms." She turned to face him one final time. Her expression had returned to its usual steady register, but something in it was different from 3 hours ago. Something had been spent, or maybe set down. Something that had been carried quietly for a long time. "I'll have my attorneys reach out to yours about the harbor financing terms. We can structure a renegotiation that protects the project timeline and defines everyone's role going forward." She paused. "The Callaway equity position is real, and I have no interest in undermining it. I want the project to succeed. That's what this was always for." "And personally?" The question hung in the cold air between them. "We're divorced, Adrian," she said. Not unkindly, but cleanly. What happens personally is that we become what people become when a complicated thing is over. We become people who encountered each other in a difficult chapter and came out the other side of it knowing things they didn't know going in. He absorbed this, nodded. "That's something," he said. "It is," she agreed. He pulled open the glass door, held it, and waited. She picked up her water glass, straightened her coat, and walked past him into the warmth of the ballroom. He followed a step behind and let the door close against the cold. Inside, the chandeliers were still bright. People were moving toward exits, collecting the expensive, comfortable wrapping of their lives, coats and clutches, and the murmur of late evening conversation. Vivian was immediately absorbed back into the room. The museum director materializing at her elbow, then a woman from the auction committee, and she moved back into it without looking back. Marcus appeared. He handed Adrian his coat without a word. Adrian put it on. "Let's go," Adrian said. They moved through the thinning crowd toward the exit. 3 people stopped Adrian on the way. Brief exchanges, the social mechanics of a room winding down. He was present for each of them, genuinely present, which was perhaps new, or perhaps something that had always been possible in him and had simply been buried under the weight of his certainty. At the door, he turned back. Vivian was across the room, in the center of a small group near the stage. The painting behind her, sold now, tagged, about to begin its journey to a new wall, glowed under the lights with the patient permanence of something that had outlasted every opinion ever formed about it. She was listening to someone speak, her head slightly inclined, and her expression was the expression he had spent 3 years seeing as emptiness and was now able to read correctly. It was presence. Pure, focused, unhurried attention to the thing directly in front of her. She did not look up. She didn't need to. He turned and walked through the door and out into the cold, and the city received him with its usual absolute indifference. The traffic, the lit windows, the November air with its particular knife of winter beginning in it. He stood on the pavement while Marcus signaled the car and looked up at the building's limestone facade, at the lights behind the tall windows, at the shapes of people moving through the warmth inside. His phone buzzed. He looked at it. His mother. He answered. "It's done," he said before she could speak. A pause. "I saw the announcement. The news cycle is already moving." Evelyn's voice was its usual controlled register, but underneath it something was different. Something he recognized because it was related to what he'd felt on the terrace. The particular quality of a person who has absorbed something large and is still in the process of deciding what it means. "How bad is it?" "The harbor project is hers," he said, controlling debt position, senior and mezzanine both. "The announcement went public tonight in front of everyone we care about." He watched a taxi cut across the intersection, horn brief and sharp. "Archer and LaSalle are going to want new conversations. I'll need to get ahead of that." "And her? What happened with her?" He thought about the terrace, the cold railing, the water glass. 4 words that cost more to say than anything he'd said in years. "We talked. And I understand things I didn't understand this morning." He paused. "I'll explain it properly when I see you, not over the phone." A beat. "Are you all right?" The question was unusual for Evelyn. She was not a woman who asked after emotional states. The fact that she asked now told him that something in his voice was legible in a way it didn't usually allow itself to be. "I don't know yet," he said, which was the most honest answer he'd given his mother in a very long time. The car pulled to the curb. Marcus opened the door. Adrian got in. The car pulled into traffic. Manhattan moved past the windows, block after block of it, the accumulation of 10 million lives going about their particular business of surviving and failing and trying, and sometimes, occasionally, seeing something clearly for the first time and letting it change them. He looked out the window. The city's light moved across his face, amber, white, red at the intersections. And he thought about his father, who had seen a brilliant woman and reached for her like a chess piece. He thought about 3 years of dinners he had eaten without tasting them. He thought about the Freight Consortium and Reston and $31 million moved through 14 accounts with a precision that would have been admirable if it hadn't been pointed at him. He thought about what it would mean to rebuild the Callaway organization without the particular arrogance that had made it vulnerable. The arrogance of men who mistake the inability to see something for proof that it isn't there. It would take years. The harbor project renegotiation alone would be a long and careful process. The investor relationships required reconstruction. The internal culture of the organization, the way it saw the world, the things it thought to look at, and the things it didn't. That was the hardest part. You couldn't restructure a culture with a memo. You could only do it through every individual decision you made from this point forward, the steady accumulation of different choices adding up over time to a different place. He knew how to do hard things. He had always known that. The car crossed town. The streets changed character, block by block, the city doing what cities do. The endless gradation from one thing into another without any clean line between them. His phone was in his hand. He looked at it for a moment, then put it in his pocket without calling anyone. There was nothing urgent tonight. The urgent things would be there in the morning, concrete and addressable, requiring specific actions in a specific order. Tonight, they could wait. Tonight, he sat in the back of a moving car and felt the cold still in his hands, and allowed himself to simply be a man who had just had a long and expensive education in what he had never been required to see before. The car crossed the final bridge. Manhattan fell away behind them, its light reflected in the water. That massive, glittering self-declaration of a city that has survived everything it has ever encountered and intends to go on surviving. Adrian watched it recede in the window until it was just glow on the water. Then he looked forward. Marcus was in the front seat, separated by the partition. Through the glass, Adrian could see the back of his head. Steady, present, there. He pressed the intercom button. "Marcus?" "Yeah. Thank you. For tonight." A pause. Longer than it needed to be, which meant Marcus was deciding how to handle something he hadn't expected. "That's what I'm here for," he said finally. "No," Adrian said. "That's what you're paid for. Thank you for tonight." Another pause. "You're welcome," Marcus said. Quiet. Real. Adrian released the button, settled back, looked at the road ahead, unspooling in the headlights, gray and direct and going somewhere. He had a lot of work to do. He would begin in the morning,